Hey everyone, it's Tyler with the Museum of the American Revolution. We're on another one of our Artisan field trips, part of our Living History at Home series. And today we're with joiner Brian McDonald in Buffalo, New York. Brian, thanks for having us. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in living history, and how you got involved in the type of woodworking called joinery.
Hi, Tyler. My name is Brian, and I'm here up in Buffalo at Northwood Historic Restoration, which is where I work. And we do a lot of traditional woodworking, mostly making sashes, old sashes, for some of the historic buildings in Buffalo. And occasionally I do some 18th century things as well, kind of in the reenacting world. So, but I also do it professionally as well. So we'll be able to kind of show you some of the different ways that the trade was done, both historically and how we actually do it now. Some of it is the same, some of it is going to be a little bit different. As far as myself, how I got interested in living history, I've been interested in living history almost since I can remember, since I was very young. I actually had a couple of friends that they were very big into Revolutionary War reenacting when we were probably about maybe like 8 years old, something like that. And they took me to an event, a Rev War event, and I got to see what that was like. And pretty much ever since then, I've been hooked. And so I've done reenacting quite a bit in New York State, sometimes in other states as well. It kind of led from that, starting out reenacting to I did work at a couple of different historic sites for about 10 years, and then ended up transitioning. About 3 years ago, transitioned into doing historical restoration work, which is what I do now. So it almost takes what I was sometimes doing with living history, some of the trades part of what I was doing with living history, and I get to do that professionally now.
That's really amazing that you've been able to straddle both of those worlds. Am I right in saying that joinery is a type of woodworking, maybe related to carpentry?
It is, yeah. It's one of the different trades that would fall under the woodworking category. Woodworking is kind of a broad category, and it was in the 18th century as well. And so carpenters would tend to be the ones that would come in, and they would generally frame out a house and get the actual structure put up and get it put together so that you've got a framing to work with. And then typically after that point, then you'd have some other of the woodworking trades that would come in, and they would continue working on the house. And so the carpenters would get it framed up, and then the joiners would come in, and they would tend to be doing, maybe you could say, some of the finished carpentry work. And so they would be tending to make windows and doors. They might make some of the fancy trims and moldings that would be going around the doors and decorating the rooms and things like that. And so carpenter is not that they are skilled workers, but they're going to be doing almost a little rougher sort of carpentry. And then joiners, carpenters are working with axes and sometimes sawing lumber and putting it together with large mortise and tenon joints. So it's kind of large work. And then joiners are going to be tending to work with smaller saws with sometimes chisels and a lot of work with hand planes. And so that's what you'll see with the demonstrations that I do in a few moments.
That's great. I'm in a house right now that has wooden windows and wooden sashes in those windows. So I'm really excited for you to tell us a little bit about your trade in the 18th century, how things like that were made historically, and then maybe as a modern joiner, what things you do and how practices have changed over time to 2020. And I'm really excited as well that we're inside your workshop, so we get to see a little bit of the projects that you're working on and the tools that you use. If you wouldn't mind showing us around a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah, I can do that. So I'll start by showing you the hand process of using a molding plane to create the profile that would go on one of the windows. And so, like I mentioned, a lot of joiners' work is going to be done using hand planes. And so I'm just going to show you here. This is an example of what a window profile could potentially look like. And this is actually one that we created in our shop, but it's actually it's actually an exact recreation of an older profile that we were matching. This is actually from the Warner House up in New Hampshire, which the house itself, I believe, dates to around 1712. So it's a very, very early house that is actually functioning as a museum house right now. Now, these windows may not date quite that early, but they may be 18th century. They may also be very early 19th century, but it's a very early profile that we were creating. So that just gives you an idea of what the profiles would look like. And now I'm actually going to show you using one of my planes how to create a profile like that. And so I've got a few different planes with me today. This is one of my earliest planes that may actually be an 18th century plane or maybe early 19th century, but it's very early because of the style of the plane and the style of profile that it does. And then I've got a couple of later planes as well. These ones date to probably the mid 19th century. So these ones are ones from the 1800s, and the profiles do change a little bit. But now we'll actually go through and kind of show you the process of working this, creating a profile by hand. So I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but taking a number of passes, you can see the profile kind of starting to develop here using a hand plane. But it does take quite a few passes to be able to create a profile by hand like this. And so typically you would go through and you would create it by hand on one side, and then you actually have to flip the piece over, and then you have to do the same thing on the other side. And then you have a profile that would end up looking something like this one right here. And so that is the old way of doing it that would have been done certainly in the 18th century. Even well into the 1800s, they may have still been using hand planes. But as you get later in the 1800s, maybe around mid 1800s and later, they do start developing some machinery some kind of basic machinery that would help them with some of these processes to make making the profiles go a little bit faster. But that is the early way of doing it, is strictly with a hand plane like that.
Brian, am I right in saying that the plane has a blade that's a certain shape and it's sort of scraping away the wood to match that curved shape, that profile? Is that how it works?
Yes, that is correct. And so the plane is a very simple device. I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera, but you'll be able to see, I'm holding it upside down right now, and you can see the wooden body that is in the shape of the profile. And then you may be able to see, hopefully you can see the metal part as well, the iron that is in there. And the iron has to be the same shape as that wooden profile. And so yeah, it's a very simple wooden plane that just has a simple wooden or metal iron in there that would create the desired profile. And that's true whether you're doing windows or even other trim work and things like that.
It's amazing that you're actually using tools from the 18th and 19th century. Were they made in a way that makes them better to use today, or are you just the type of person who enjoys using something that has that history?
I do enjoy using something that has that history. And one of the reasons that I do use one of my older planes for doing sash making when I'm doing it for a demo that relates to the 18th century, I like to use it because some of the other later sash planes that I have, they just don't have the same profile. And so I do like using that one because it has the particular profile that you need to be able to create the look of a very early window. And so it's hard to be able to, without using machinery or something like that, it's hard to be able to replicate that part of what the window looks like otherwise.
Thanks. I understand we might get to see some different types of machinery now if you wanted to take us on a quick spin.
Yeah, I can do that. I did want to show just briefly one more hand tool process, and then we can transition into the machinery. So the profiles, like I said, would be created with a hand plane. The other thing that would be done by hand early on when you're making windows is I'm going to show you one of the joints here that would actually create the frame of the window. And so this is an example joint that is from not quite an 18th century window, but this is taken from an old sash that we had that I've scraped the paint off of so that you can see the joinery. And this dates from this one does date from probably the mid 1800s. And you can see them, this is a mortise and tenon joint that you're looking at right here. And so it is one piece of wood that has been slotted out, and then you've got a tenon that is fitting into that slot. And that's how some of the joinery was done. And I just wanted to show really quick how the mortises were chopped. So you saw the hand planing. Now I want to show how to chop a mortise with a hand chisel, because I do have a modern equivalent for that in the machine shop as well. So this is the chisel, a mortising chisel. This is specifically for making that mortise, that square hole that you need to make for joinery like that. And so I'm going to use this tool, this chisel, to demonstrate how to chop a mortise. I have to grab a mallet real quick. And we're going to need to, you might want to point the camera down. So I've already laid out where I want my joint to go. And I'm going to start the cut by just placing the chisel here, pounding down. And then using a number of chops, I'm just going to simply work my way down the joint. Each time the chisel goes in a little bit further than it did before. And as you go down, you can actually use this chisel as leverage to begin to pry out the material.
Could we look just slightly downward, Brian?
Yeah.
We could, yeah, a little bit farther would be perfect, I think. Yeah, that's great right there.
Okay. So each time you chop, you can begin to leverage material out. The chisel begins to go down further and further as you march along. And using a series of cuts like that, this enables you to create a very precise square hole that you need for your joinery. So that's one of the other hand tool processes that would be involved in making windows.
Brian, now I'm thinking about how complicated these windows are. And I wonder if you have any sense of, say, a typical window that people might have seen that might have 6 panes of glass with those profiled pieces separating them, and the joints that you were just demonstrating around the frame. How long would a window like that have taken to make if you were just using hand tools in the 18th century?
It's a difficult question for me to answer. It's one that I get a lot because everybody is curious about the amount of time that it actually takes when you're strictly doing it by hand. A lot of times when I have worked on windows by hand, it's usually been for demonstration purposes, and it's so broken up by doing interpretation and actually talking to people and explaining the process that so far I haven't gotten a very good sense. I've not made one start to finish where that's all I'm doing. So it is a difficult question to answer in that sense. But I got to imagine that these guys being familiar with the tools, and if you're dealing with sharp tools, you know how to have your planes well tuned up, your chisels are sharp and everything. I'm sure that these guys, once they've learned the ways of doing it, are able to move through doing a number of sashes relatively quickly with some practice. Okay, at this point, are you ready to go into the machine shop?
Yeah, let's check your shop out.
Okay, so we'll see how much of this you can see. So I'm here in the machine part of our shop where we actually do create some of our windows here in the modern world in the 21st century. And the particular machine that I'm in front of right now is actually you could say that it's the modern equivalent of what I just did with the hand plane. This is actually the machine that we use to create the profiles for our windows when we have a whole run of windows that we're doing, and we're actually doing, we're trying to produce things and we're doing this professionally. We are trying to make some money off of it. And so this is one of the modern innovations that has been created to make that part of the process quicker. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the machine for you just so you can see a little bit how it actually, what it looks like and kind of how it works. And this machine is known as a molding machine because it does create moldings for, in our case, windows or any type of trim or anything like that you're creating. You could do that with this machine. So I'm just going to remove the cover here. And down inside of the machine, you can see a set of knives. These are the knives. You actually have a pair of them. And so we actually have a pair of knives here. And these are actually the knives. These we get custom made. They are kind of expensive to have them custom made, but when we have a particular job that has a very specific profile that we need, we'll actually get these custom made. And these are actually the knives that made that early profile that I showed you earlier. And this is the machine that I used to actually create that. And then, so those are the knives that would create the profile. And then the other thing I wanted to show you here, if you can see it, is these help the process too. You should be able to see, hopefully you can see some black, guides right here. And those black guides allow you to be able to run a piece of wood through, and it's going to be the same. Once you've lined the profile up and set up the machine, you can run a number of pieces through, and it's going to be the same result each time. And so it makes the process be a little bit faster in the sense that it does take some time up front to set up the machine, but once you get it set up, if you have a run of things to do, this machine, it does make it go faster in the long run. But it's, I guess the way that I look at it is the modern ways of doing it, it's almost like you spend more time up front setting up the machine and less time woodworking, whereas with the early tools, you have a longer process using the tools, but the whole process may take a little bit longer because of that, if that kind of makes sense. But you're spending the whole time actually doing woodworking and actually feeling the wood and things like that. And that's one of the things that I like about using the hand tool method, even though sometimes it can be a little slower than the modern equivalents when you're doing a number of windows at one time. The other thing I wanted to show you, the other machine in the machine shop that I wanted to show you that will demonstrate how to do the mortises is we actually have a mortising machine as well. And so we'll wander over here and see if you can you see that? Okay. Okay, so this is our mortising machine. And so this is basically the equivalent of the mortising chisel that I used before. And so basically it's in machine form. It's of course been electrified and all of that. And what you have, I'm gonna come in a little bit closer here so that maybe you can see this. So what you have here is you have this square chisel that actually has a drill bit in the middle of it, but then a square chisel that's kind of around that. And so this is a lot like a drill press. If people are familiar with a drill press, this is almost the same idea, except this is just creating a square hole for joinery rather than a round hole that a drill press would typically do. And so this is the machine that you can use to actually create mortises by machine and not have to use a hand chisel anymore. And one thing I wanted to show you before I actually demonstrate this process is I do have a book here that I wanted to show you that's actually a tool catalog. And this tool catalog is from, let me take a look at the date. It's from 1873 actually. And because some of the windows that we make are from around the 1800s. And so this catalog kind of fits into the time frame that we're working, up here in Buffalo. And what I wanted to show you, let's see if you can see this is actually an image in the middle of the page there. You'll see an image of actually a very early mortising machine from 1873, which I think is really neat. And so the idea of the mortising machine actually does go back to the 1800s. And it's actually foot operated. There's actually a foot pedal that's down on the bottom there, instead of the electric that I just showed you. So I showed you the modern machine. There you've got kind of a transitional, last quarter of the 1800s, what their machine would look like. And then you saw the mortising chisel, which is how you do it earlier than that. And the other thing that you might be tickled by, Tyler, is that particular catalog is actually from Philadelphia in 1873. Or it was actually published in Philadelphia.
Hey, that's really cool. So hometown connection for us. That's pretty neat.
Absolutely. If you give me just a second, I realized that I didn't bring my one of my pieces of wood in. I can actually give you a quick demonstration on the on how the mortising machine works. actually, Lindsay's gonna grab it for us. Can you grab that chunk that I was planing earlier? That's kind of smaller chunk. I didn't want to demonstrate the molding machine because it would be really loud and really obnoxious, but this one is a little quieter, and so hopefully it'll be an okay machine to actually give a quick demonstration of. Okay. Let's see. I'm just gonna direct the camera. Is that good? Okay, so what we can do is we can clamp the piece of wood in place like so. And I've laid out where I want my my joint to go, and I put some pencil lines there. So I'm then gonna put this on the machine. We've got a nice little clamp here. This is one of the things that I like about this machine is that this particular machine it's well clamped in place. You actually have a couple of adjustment levers here, so that you can actually move it side to side. And I can even adjust the dimensions of it this way too. And we'll turn the machine on and we'll
get a thumbs up from Tyler.
Okay. Can you see that, Tyler?
Yeah, that looks perfect. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and turn the machine on and we'll give you a quick demonstration of how to chop a mortise using a modern mortising machine. And minus the wood chips, you can see that we have the start of a mortise there.
Brian, that's really fascinating. You know, it was interesting. It was fast, but it wasn't lightning speed. And it made me think of something you and I were talking about last year when you joined us at the museum. You were making the blocks for cartridge boxes, the wooden pieces that go inside a soldier's ammunition pouch. And if I remember right, I think you had discovered that hand tools in some cases were the same speed or even faster than some machine work. So is that the case with a mortising machine? Is it light years faster, or is it just more efficient for other reasons, for the amount of work it takes?
I would say that's a really good question. And I have discovered with certain operations, I almost think that the hand tools may be almost as fast as the machines in some cases. It was the case with boring some of the holes for the cartridge pouches that I was making for that one particular demo. I timed it when I got home. I timed it doing it by hand, and then I pulled out my modern drill and kind of timed the process of doing the same diameter hole with the modern drill. And it was only like a couple of seconds faster. And so it was just a hair faster, but not by much. And so in that case, the hand tool operation was almost as fast as the modern equivalent. And I would have to say with the case of the mortising machine that we just showed you, it's probably kind of similar. It's maybe not lightning fast compared to the hand tool method, but what's nice about it is that it's probably a little bit faster overall, and it does give you a lot of control over and consistent results. And so that would probably be some of the advantages that the mortising machine would have, is that once you've set it up, you know everything's where it needs to be. But you saw that it's still kind of, in a sense, the mortising machine is still kind of similar to the hand tool process, because you still have to, you saw me chopping along almost with the mortising machine the same way that we did it by hand. And so it's probably not like lightning years faster, but it does give you some consistent results. And it's probably a little bit faster than doing it by hand. But sometimes machines aren't always faster. It kind of depends on the operation that's being done.
That's really amazing. You know, one thing this has gotten me thinking about are some pieces in our collection. When we built the museum, we did an archaeological excavation of the area where the museum now is. We found about 85,000 artifacts dating back to the 18th century in outhouses, in privies, in trash heaps. And one of the most amazing things we found were broken panes of window glass from an 18th century house that had names and poetry inscribed in them, scratched in them in the 1770s. And I've always really thought those were some of the most amazing objects that we have in our collection, but I had never thought about the windows that they were once part of, a complicated wooden structure that would have been time consuming to make, a skilled trade to make. So it's been really interesting to see how the work that was done in the 1770s compares with what you're doing today. I imagine that just like me, other folks might want to follow your work, or they might have follow-up questions about joinery. Are there good places online that they could keep up with what you're doing?
Absolutely. I do have a website, which is, I know you'll provide the link for it down below, so you can take a look for that, but it is www.tapestryofTime.org. And so you can find me there. I do have a website that shows some of the different demonstrations and programs that I do and have done. And I'm also on Instagram, and occasionally I'll do some Instagram postings of some of the projects that I'm working on and things like that. And so you can also find me on Instagram as well, just under my name, Brian McDonald.
Well, Brian, I wanted to thank you again for joining us on this Artisan field trip, part of our Living History at Home series. And we're really excited to welcome Brian back to the museum in the future. He's been a regular at our Occupied Philadelphia event. That's one of the events that I think, Brian, you've been working on a window over the course of several years, taking it all the way maybe to finished product soon. So we'll look forward to having you join us again at the museum, and for the opportunity for folks to see your work both at our Living History events and in some cases already in use in the museum as some of our handling objects like those cartridge boxes. So thanks again, Brian.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.